All right, let's call to order. This is going to be City of Port Richey City Council meeting for Tuesday, February 14. At this time, I'd like to invite Danny Fields for invocation and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance as well.
God, we just want to thank you for being able to call on you and have this business meeting with City Hall coming to order, Lord. We just thank you for Nancy that's here, the lawyer, and she's a team player, and we can work together and everything for the stuff that's coming up for council business, the planning overview, the storm and water budget. We thank you that we have wisdom there and we can deal with our piping and plumbing and stuff, and then the storm surges, which will be brought up, that we'll know how to work with the City Hall and the communities and the faith-based churches and the residents, how to deal with flooding zones. And we thank you for that as well, God. And the supplies of the impound vehicles, how we could continue to upgrade new vehicles and get rid of the old and recoup some of the money for the cost of that. We thank you for the planning of the 2023 fireworks show. We know that will be better than before, and we'll have those that are going to work on that. It will go to be a great success in the community with the residents. And then the old business, we thank you for the street projects of the APRA, and things will be done there as you continue to give us wisdom, and the water and sewer rate study. And so I just want to thank you for the wisdom and for the unity. This is a place where we could live and work and play together, Lord. And we just thank you for the police and the fire department and all you do through them, and the first responders and all the workers here. And we thank you that it is a good day for Valentine's Day. You so loved us that you give your son Jesus so we can be blessed. In Jesus' name, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Meyer? No, Meyer. That's my favorite story.
Before we get to roll call, I wanted to introduce Nancy Meyer, who's sitting to my left. We're blessed to have her and welcome her here as our city attorney. And she works for the Trask Law Firm, who we've retained. However, she's been assigned to our city, and we're excited to have her on board. So I just wanted to welcome her. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Mayor Scott Tremblay.
Here.
Vice Mayor Tom Kinsella. Let the record show that Vice Mayor Tom Kinsella is absent from tonight's meeting. Councilman Todd McClary. Let the record show that Councilman Todd McClary is absent from tonight's meeting. Councilwoman Linda Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilman Bill Colombo.
Let the record show I am here.
City Attorney Nancy Meyer.
Here.
City Manager John Dew.
Here. Thank you. At this time, I was looking for a motion to approve council minutes.
Motion to approve council minutes.
Second. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to hold up the meeting all night long.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. We're going to move on to commentary from the general public. We've had several people that have signed up, so we'll start there. And then anyone else who would like to speak, by show of hands, will be welcome to speak. The first person that signed up was Mr. Danny Fields. Welcome.
My name's Danny Fields, and my address is 8114 Leo Kidd Avenue in Port Richey. And I just want again to thank you for being able to work in this community, working with Yuns. We got the 40 Days of Prayer coming up, and it's going to be starting on February the 22nd at 6:30 every Wednesday. And it's a 40-day prayer, and what we do is the faith-based church and communities work together, and this will be a time that we could invite some of you to come and speak and pray and let community know that that you're here, and the faith-based church and government works together. So it's a good opportunity to get known through the faith-based church and all those. It'll be at Oasis Coffee Spot, and that's Jerry's. And a lot of pastors and leaders will come. We've had offers before there, and fire department and leaders of all businesses, and we all come together to just to pray and pray for God to move and to bless the city where there'll be peace and protection and all these things. So I wanted to tell you the address of that. That's going to be Oasis Coffee Spot here in Florida, and it is in 9213 Little Road, I'm wrong, Port Richey, and the zip there is 34654. And so, and that's basically a good place to go to get coffee. They have food, and also they have a Christian bookstore there as well. So I hope that that would be a good opportunity for you guys to show up and just to get to know the community better, and they get to know you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fields.
You're welcome.
The next person that signed up is, I'll do the best I can, is it Steve Kochik? Is that pronounced right? Mr. Kochik, we have your address on file, thank you.
Thank you. The reason for me coming tonight is I'm sure that when something goes wrong in the city or something happens, you get complaints, and people are there to tell you how to do things properly over and over and over again. Tonight, I want to come down and just, this is to congratulate the city on the staff of the Public Works Department, I believe they are. I'll give you the situation. They're undergrounding the electric cables for Duke Energy in the area. I live on Chapel Avenue. And they had come first and scoped out all the lines, the water lines, the sewer lines, everything, and all marked it and all to prevent any problems happening. Well, as it would happen, as they were coming down my street, the neighbor across the street had an unusual situation where they actually had to trench his front yard, then go underneath the road to bring the conduit. And in so doing, when they went down, my sewer line was right there. And I had spoken to them and said, the line is there, they marked it and all, that's the sewer line, be a little careful. No problem, no problem. As sometimes happen in construction, they broke the sewer line. I went out there, I saw that it was broken. They said, don't worry, we'll repair it. I said, watched it. They put a repair on, and I really wasn't happy with the repair that was done. So now this is where the city comes in. I called up the city and I spoke to someone in, I believe it's the Utilities Department, Public Works Department, I'm sorry, a young lady. I explained the situation, what had happened, that it was broken. And without blinking an eye, she said, we have a plumber that we normally call. I'm going to call him up. He's going to come out, take a look, and he'll evaluate the situation. Then he'll call us, and we'll see what happens and all. Sure enough, in a short while, plumber showed up with his truck, took a look at it. He wasn't happy with the repair. He says, I'll take care of it. Within a matter of minutes, he had put a repair I was very happy with. I have some plumbing experience, so I knew what would be a better fit for the repair, and that's exactly what he did. So I just want to say the efficiency of your department, the efficiency of the workers, and I'm new resident to Port Richey, and in going around the city and seeing different people working in the city, I see that you have a staff of people working that take pride in their work. They do a great job, and most of all important, which I find, is that if you speak to them, they will answer your questions, they will keep you informed, and they do what they say they're going to do. Be very proud of these people, and the leadership behind them is what makes them that way. Do not change. Please do not change. You have something, an asset, that very few communities have, and they wish they had. And I'd like to thank you for that. Good night.
The next person that has signed up is Ms. Pat Rogers. Welcome.
Pat Rogers, 4838 Sunset Boulevard. First, I'd like to invite all of you that can come tomorrow at noon at the Light of the World. Somebody Cares Pasco has their monthly lunch meeting there, and it's from noon until usually till about 2 o'clock by the time everybody talks, and they talk about the upcoming events, like the next one will be Easter in the park. And so everybody here is invited. Just please come for lunch and fellowship and enjoy. Right?
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. I believe that's all that's signed up. However, I wanted to open it up to the general public if anyone else would like to speak by show of hands. Seeing no hands, we're going to close off the public commentary section, move on to our commentary from our city manager, and I want to invite Mr. Duke to speak this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been 3 weeks since you've had a report from us, 3-week break from council meetings, so got a page and a quarter of things to bring you up to date on. I had the pleasure of attending the Municipal Association of Pasco with Councilman Kinsella and Councilman Colombo. That's an organization that gets together to talk mutually beneficial ideas and challenges. Staff and council are always invited. Port Richey will be hosting the next meeting in May, and so it should be relatively easy for us to get there. No excuses. So that's coming up. I appreciate Mr. Kinsella and Mr. Colombo joining me for that evening. The fishing pier design, the drafts are nearing completion. We have a plan review, we staff have a plan review meeting set with Coastal and the architect. That meeting will take place scheduled for the first week in March. And obviously, once we've completed a first glance at the plans, we'll bring them to you to review, have input. I haven't seen them, but I understand there may be a couple of options that will be presented. So that's coming up the first part of March. I know the mayor and maybe others of you have received concerns, questions, complaints about water. And so sat down with staff over the last couple of days, kind of review our operations. What do we do and what kinds of activities might cause water concerns? Stained water, lack of clarity in water. So I wanted to make you aware of several activities that we engage in that could cause water to be stained temporarily and hopefully on rare occasion. One of the things we do is hydrant testing. And the fire department goes out, opens up the hydrants, meters the water to make sure that the flow is adequate for fighting fire. And that's an ongoing, all through the year, we test the hydrants to make sure they work. Anytime we do that, there's a high volume of water going through the lines, and it may very temporarily and in a very local area cause some discoloration. We're in the process of installing auto flushers. These are valves that open up, particularly on dead-end lines and flush lines. Now, the intent will be to set them to flush overnight, but when those turn on in the middle of the night, there could be some slight discoloration the next morning. Obviously, line breaks. Anytime we have an open line and we fix it, there's the possibility of discoloration in the water. And then there are regular operations and maintenance that takes place at the water plant that could temporarily cause water discoloration. So one, I wanted to get the word out that there are things that may happen in the system to cause that. In talking to staff, there's also some things we can do to try to do a little better job of making people aware of when we're doing that, where we're doing that. And so staff and I are going to be diligently working to get the word out. If we're in your neighborhood, we're doing hydrant testing, we've got a line break. I think we do a pretty good job of getting line break information out, but we're going to add some information reporting to that to try to get the word out so people know that, if we're doing hydrant testing in your neighborhood, you might let the water run another 10 seconds or so before using it. The water's tested regularly to make sure that it's appropriate, and there's not been any problems with that. We've had no negative test results from our regular testing. So the water's safe. When you get a boil water notice, that's not only state required, but it also tells you there's a possibility that you may need to boil water until the line is flushed. That usually comes as related to a line break where there may be a possibility of contaminant in the water. So we'll keep working on the notification process. We'll do a better job with that. But I just want to let people know why it is that may happen. Anytime we run high volume, if we fight a fire, we're going to run a lot of water through the lines, and it's by design, it's going to pull sediment. So we'll keep working on that, try to improve our communication to the community. The street maintenance project, we've got final calculations, are in process with the contractor. I was reviewing the street list with staff. There's some streets on the list that may be private streets that we need to take off the list. There's a couple of them that were listed that were actually county. So Sal and I are going through the list to make sure that what we direct to the contractor is actually our street. So there's some work continuing on that. Would expect to have a purchase request ready to go in March. Cody River Landing Project, got an update from AIRS this week. Duke has completed the pole location assessment. They're currently coordinating with property owners for easements. The traffic study parameters have been confirmed with FDOT. That's for the roadway changes at Coty and US 19. So AIRS will have a proposal for service ready next week, and I would anticipate our meeting in March, our last meeting in February, you'll see that. AIRS is working on a plan to construct parking lot on the city-owned lots. It'll be a plan. It's something for you to consider. And finally, the bid packet is ready. It's awaiting final lighting design from Duke. So as soon as Duke signs off on the lighting plan, the bid packet will be ready to go out. It'll come here first, but then we'll put it out. Had an opportunity to discuss golf cart crossing over US 19 with the city manager in Newport Richey. They are, as you've seen in the media, they've been in contact with FDOT, with our state rep, and there's a lot of interest in Newport in getting permission from FDOT to allow golf carts to cross 19 legally. We will be partnering. The FDOT's going to require a traffic study of the intersections that are requested. We're going to add Grand at US 19 to the traffic study. Port Richey will pay our share, and then we will collectively submit a request for golf cart crossings to FDOT. So it'll be both cities submitting that request. The 23-24 budget development schedule is something we talked about. Rachel and I will be putting together. I left my notes out of here, but that's in progress. We'll start with department budgets. Once those are done, I think we're looking at April or May to bring large purchases for consideration to council, and then regular budget meetings will start early in July. So that's in process. Department heads right now are putting their departmental budgets together, and we'll have, as we did last year, we'll put together the large purchases for your consideration. Stormwater MS4 permit consent letter deadline is, we've got another deadline, 17th of February. The documents that were required in that deadline have been submitted. I think they went in today. And so we're ahead of schedule. That does give state staff some time to review it and kick it back if they want something added or subtracted. But Sal, Richie, and Veronica and other staff have been working very diligently to not only to get it submitted, but get it submitted ahead of time. I had a request from a resident to create basically a work order link on the city's website. So staff is working on that, and hopefully our intent is that will allow residents to submit their mostly public works concerns. Need a repair here, there's a pothole there, could we do some trimming or pickup? So staff is working on that, and I thought it was a good idea from a member of our community. We'll get that put together, we'll test it, but that'll allow not only residents, but if any of you wanted to submit hey, have Public Works go take a look at this. There's a swing broken in the park, or this needs to be painted. The more it bypasses these processes, the quicker it gets done. So if you can click on a button and submit a request and it goes right to Public Works, it'll get addressed a lot quicker. We're in the process of receiving quotes for dock repair at Nix Park. Building official took a look at the dock there, and there's some structural issues that need to be addressed. There was a couple of safety issues that needed to be addressed. Richie and his crews have addressed the safety issues, but there's some repair work that's beyond the scope of our staff, and so we're getting quotes on that. We got some pylons and some cross members that need to be shored up and repaired. So going to be working on that. We're in the process of getting quotes right now. City staff are still in the process of replacing valves at the Chapel and Regis lift stations. As soon as that work is completed, contractor will come in and do the renovation and upgrade to those 2 lift stations. You may have seen in social media, city staff's been jetting stormwater lines on the south side of the city. It's an important maintenance process, and I know we've talked a lot about stormwater over the last month or so, but that's just one of the regular things they do, and trying to get that information out. I'm excited about it. I don't know if staff is, but we're going to start smoke testing, the second tranche of smoke testing, so that starts February 20th. We're going to be on the south side of the city this time. Florida Rural Water Association provides the equipment, they provide the expertise, and then it's our obligation to go out and find the leaks that, find the smoke that's coming out of the ground. We'll repeat the repair processes that we used the first time we did this. We'll send notices to private property owners if they have what appear to us to be leaks in their sewer system. The leaks that are on public property, our guys will take care of and continue to try to tighten up our sewer system, which not only reduces the amount of water we have to run through lift stations, reduces the cost, because every drop of rainwater that goes into our sewer system, we have to treat it, we have to pay for it. And so if we keep rainwater outside of the sewer system, so that's the purpose there. Last time we found 44 leaks on the east side of the city. I don't know what we'll find on the south side, but starting on the 20th, that will begin. We're obviously coordinating with the fire department, and Chief Policastri will be on standby. Citizens and residents see smoke coming out of the ground, they may call 911. They see smoke coming out of their garage or their outhouse or even their kitchen, they may call 911. So Chief Policastri is aware, and he may get some extra business to go check things out. It's a white smoke. It's very obvious when it's coming out of the ground, and gives us a good bead on how we're going to fix that. Testing should be completed by the 22nd, and then the real work begins of taking all those dots on a map and getting out and fixing them. The stormwater rate increase that was approved at the last council meeting has been implemented. It'll be reflected on the utility bills that go out tomorrow. So if you get questions about that, or City Hall may get some questions, it has been implemented. You've got a resolution to amend the budget based on that. You'll address that this evening. The dog park is here at City Hall is expected to be open first week of March. We're still pouring water to the side and letting that seat and root so that it's permanent. We don't want to have to replace that again. Very excited. I know this was in the media, and some of you have had questions about it. The city received a notice of award for a U.S. Department of Transportation grant for safe street planning. And it was a grant that Pam put together. I really appreciate her hard work. She had some help with that. What that's going to allow us to do is create a comprehensive safe street plan. And the contractor will go out, look at all of our streets, look at all of our intersections, and come up with a plan of how do we make streets safer? What kinds of changes, projects, mitigations, improvements would make any particular street in our city safer? Once we have the plan, and that's what the $161,000 pays for. It doesn't pay for any pavement, no lights, no, this is not doing construction. This is creating the plan. The DOT program is in two phases, and they put out the planning money first, and then they put out the actual doing things grants after that. If you have a plan, your application gets much stronger consideration when you come back and say, these 3 projects in our plan, we'd like funding to do them. We want to fix this intersection, we want to increase lights, we want a sidewalk here, whatever it is. And so step 1 to improving our street system is do the plan. Really excited to have that funding. That's a lot of money that, we would not have found in our own budget. So appreciate Pam's hard work on that. Like I said, she had help on that, but that's a pretty exciting opportunity for us. In the same vein, we also received notice of award from FEMA. The city is going to receive $22,898 in expenditure reimbursement for our preparations for Hurricane Ian. Pam, Rachel, Chief Policastri, Chief Robinson, Sal, Richie, and there's probably others that I'm missing, but this was a team effort that Pam and Rachel led. They spent a lot of time interacting, shall we say, with FEMA, painfully at times, hours of back and forth with FEMA. The end result is FEMA's approved $22,000 to reimburse us for our Hurricane Ian preparations. If you haven't seen it, go poke your head in the west side. The carpet replacement is completed there. Appreciate staff. That was a monumental effort. We basically moved everything and everybody out of the west side, put them in council chambers, and city operations continued from council chambers for, I think, 3 days. Anybody that came in to pay their water bill or get a building permit was able to do that. They did it in council chambers, but staff had to move everything. George had to set up all the computers, and it was quite an operation to see people hustling. And so I really appreciate all the hard work to get that accomplished. The carpet's down. Everybody's been moved back, but it was a setup and tear down over a 3-day process. So as far as I could tell, there wasn't any disruption in city services, and our customers, our residents, got the service they needed. They just had to come into the chambers to do it. Last thing on my list, Publix closes at 9. And so if you haven't bought your flowers, happy Valentine's Day. I'll leave it to the council and the mayor to get us out of here in time for some of us that may not have bought flowers yet. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. I stand for your questions.
Thank you. I want to move on to commentary from the board now, if we may. I wanted to open it up with where he ended up, let things off. Certainly loving the city to be here tonight. So happy Valentine's Day to everybody. I'm glad to share it with you guys, and hopefully we'll get to this quickly. I did have a handful of things that I wanted to address. Water quality, I had several people, particularly in my area of the city, down Bay Boulevard and down towards the Point, that have said that there's a lot of brown hue in the water that's been happening more currently. So I passed that along to Mr. Newton. Looks like he's looked into that. I've experienced it in my house, and if you let the tap run for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, it'll dissipate, but it takes a little, you have to run the water for a minute for that to happen. The thing that I wanted to bring up is that the businesses in the Cody River Landing area had met. They've contacted me suggesting they wanted a workshop with us. And I think that at the last meeting, they suggested that. My concern is that's kind of backwards from procedurally the way things we normally do things. It's my understanding if they had changes to the code or changes that they want down there, that we actually have a board that actually will vet that and make recommendations that will then come to us. So my recommendation wasn't not to have a workshop, but to get those requests, whatever those requests were for the zoning change, and submit them to the zoning and planning board, which we have. I think we have an active board, and then allow them to vet that and make recommendations. And then that we'll have something more to work off of. So I didn't want the businesses that have reached out to suggest that we didn't want a workshop. I just wanted to do it in the proper manner. And once we have recommendations, if they want a workshop or bring it back to us, I think that's the appropriate way to handle it. So I'm not sure who facilitates that within the city. I think, potentially they would forward it to you and you would give it to the appropriate board. So that's what I wanted to suggest with that particular issue.
Just to jump in on that, I would suggest scheduling a P&Z meeting and let them discuss it. Again, you're correct, it's specifically in the P&Z's job description, as it were, what they function to do is changes to zoning districts, overlay districts. They may want to do a little organizational meeting first together and decide how to approach it. We can give them direction.
The next thing that I had done is, I see that the city in the last couple of years, since we've had a grant manager, have put together a lot of different grants. And they're all in different areas in terms of how far along we are in those grant applications. One thing we haven't had is a presentation on those different grants and where they're at. And then the other thing that happens, which nobody's really brought up on these individual grants, is while we look at it as free money, it's not always free money because there's a cost to administer these grants, and we vet that as one of the things we do as part of the city. So to see if there's a cost benefit analysis to each grant, whether or not it's worth the money that we have to put out to get it. So I think that I've asked Mr. Duke to put together a spreadsheet and a presentation for us, but I wanted to make sure that the rest of the dais or council is okay of having them put that on as an agenda item.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. Knowing what's going on with the grants, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my only concern would be if we have somebody who's actively pursuing grants, there are an awful lot of grants to be pursued. There may be 15, 20 of them out there. It's just, okay, let's start working on it, make an application, get on the list, so to speak. As John said, a lot of these grant programs, they want to see plans in place. Other ones, you just get your name on the list. I don't necessarily need a report on every single grant that we're looking at. I would expect we'd kind of whittle it down to those that are.
And if I may clarify, there's a list of them that we've already applied, and there's updates that I don't think we necessarily know about on the dais. And I wanted those updates so if the citizen, or even just for the people that watch the meetings, to know what's going on with some of the grants that we already have.
I would venture to add to that, though. I'm just guessing here, but in the normal course of events, a lot of them, there's really not much of an update other than we've applied, we're waiting to hear something. And that may be the report.
Okay.
There is a report in our monthly reports.
Yeah, there was a list.
Yeah, there's a list of 11 things.
Right. I think they have a detailed spreadsheet for each one, and that way they can answer any questions that they have. So I just asked to have it as an agenda item. One of the other things that happened over the last 3 weeks is on social media, it was clear there were issues with the golf cart crossing 19. I picked up the phone and called Brad Yeager, who's our representative here, and I had a conversation with him before the article came out. And I told him that we as a city have been petitioning, I think it started back about 4 years ago when I was first elected, to have golf carts cross on Grand and 19. As we have the easements, we have clear vision, there's not a lot of businesses on the corner, so it's a nice place to cross. And that DOT sent us a letter saying absolutely not because of the state rule. He said that he had the same discussion with Newport Richey, and they've now applied to cross on Main Street in Gulf were two of the intersections. Marine Parkway was the third. And he said that he had put legislation together rather than have a rule saying you can't do it, to have a rule saying that it should be a case-by-case basis on each intersection. So based on that conversation, he's been in contact with DOT, and they said that they, according to what he's telling me, it's my understanding that they're going to revisit our application and maybe circumvent that rule for us to cross and make an individual determination whether or not it's safe to cross at Grand as well as the other three with the traffic study. So I passed that along to Mr. Deal, which is what prompted his reaching out to, because he also said that he didn't want to deal with DOT more than once. So if Newport Richie applies, can you guys apply at the same time so we don't have to do this twice? So that's what prompted that. I reached out to Mr. Dude. I passed the information along, and I think he's been in contact with Mrs. Mans over in Newport Richie. Yes, sir. And that has a massive impact on us because if we're allowed to cross 19 and Grand on golf carts. With the golf carts, then that alleviates the pressure for the golf carts on the hike and bike trail, which has been one of the expensive propositions that was presented by I think the county. So I just wanted to touch base and let everyone know what happened there. The last issue I wanted to touch on is I went to a ribbon cutting. I wanted to welcome Lighthouse Subs. It was over in the Ritchie Road Plaza over there. And I appeared for a ribbon cutting. The CNC also coincidentally had a meet and greet there at the same time that he had his grand opening. And I was asked there, I guess, about that. And I think in our particular code, our charter, my position, that's one of the perks, is I get to go do the ceremonies and the ceremonial stuff. So I've gone to at least probably 8 grand openings between the Power Sports Place to the rental place to doctor's office, and whether it's a ribbon cutting, grand opening, I think we've been to a couple together. I generally go. And the differences that we talked about on the dais last time is when the CAC invited me. I normally don't go to CAC meetings because they're sunshine rules. And I think there's another member of the dais here that talks about city business. So I don't go to the CAC meetings for that reason. Meet and greets are a little bit different. They're social. But I generally go if the business owner invites me, as opposed to the CAC putting it together and inviting me. And I know it sounds like it's splitting hairs, but it came up. But I wanted to explain the reason that I went is because the business owner invited me. So I felt that it was one of the things I was supposed to do, and I went and participated.
Thank you, because there was some discussion at our last CAC meeting, and there was some confusion regarding the conversation we had up with the dais, and that we weren't doing it. So thank you for the clarification.
And it's not that when you say we, the CAC did the meet and greet, but the actual grand opening was put on by the business. They put the food out. They did the ribbon cutting with me, and that was something that the business had done independent, I think, of the CAC. So that was kind of what happened. Okay. And I think some people wanted some clarification.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I believe that's all I have, and I wanted to pass it over to Mr. Colombo for any commentary.
No, I really don't have anything particularly important to say, except to the gentleman that was here. I don't know if he's still here.
No, he left.
He left? Okay. We have a contact person with Duke, so if he has any issues, John knows who it is, and the city knows who it is. So we do have a person that works specifically on the hardening project for the area, not just our city, and she's very, very, very responsive. So, sometimes people have issues with Duke, and they just call Duke, and they're not going to get somebody who's going to help them. They call her, she won't get back to them. She was the one that did that presentation. Other than that, I have.
Okay.
You had a couple of my things, the golf course, the ribbon cutting. I was wondering, the house on Bay Boulevard that we had talked about, what is the status of that?
So city staff has received an email from a contractor, and it sounds like the finance company that has money against the property is getting involved. They've hired this company. It's a reputable company. It's somebody we know. So it looks like the intent on the part of the bank is to make repairs, protect their investment. I've been in contact with Mr. Alexander to get his list of here's all the things that you need to work on. So it feels to me like, I don't want to make any promises, but it sure feels like it's headed in the direction we would all prefer, and that is, let's get the house fixed up and get it back to where it's a productive structure in our community. But that's kind of where we are now. We've been notified that a company wants to talk to Mike, and make progress.
Very good, thank you.
That's where we would preferably want to be,
Absolutely.
by the way. It's just not like any of us just love tearing down houses.
Right.
Correct.
You know,
As long as it gets
As
fixed.
long as there's action happening.
Right.
To improve the property on the property owner side, that's great.
Presumably, the bank will be much more aggressive about that.
I guess
They-
in the game.
They do. So that, for me, that was a positive thing. You know, like you, I really would prefer it return to being a productive structure.
Thank you.
The last thing I wanted to make commentary, I think it's worth at least noting up here, just for you guys and for the general public. The other conversation I had with Mr. Brad Yeager was the status of the potential dredging in Port Richey and where we were at with dredging. And I told him that I had some lengthy meetings with DEP about what we can and can't do with government funding versus what we can and can't do with private funding, or assessing, different ways to do it. So he's requested a sit down with me, so I told him I would meet with him, because he had some concerns or questions that were from some of our citizens into his office about the dredging. So I wanted to meet with him, get those concerns, and then once I do that, I'll bring it back for a further discussion if it's necessary, but I'll keep the dais and the public updated on what conversations I have with him on that particular issue or topic. And he wasn't aware that I had met with DEP and other officials to kind of see what we can and can't do. So I was gonna pass it along and have a conversation with them, and I'll keep you guys updated on what I find out.
Okay.
So I think that's all that I had from commentary on the board, if you guys don't have anything further. I wanted to move on to commentary from any of the boards or committees. And I didn't see anyone here other than Councilwoman Rodriguez, who sits on the CAC, if there's any updates over there.
No, we had the, meet your neighbor, and it was quite good, a lot of new faces there, so it was very good.
The one thing I wanted to comment on this, I bring the family over to Sims Park, and they do a lot of events in their park on the weekends that are city sanctioned, whether it's concerts, movies at Sims Park, what have you. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and I think one of the things that the CNC could do for us, is to maybe organize a movie in the park, a family-oriented movie in the park, and have a Friday or Saturday evening that you guys choose to put a movie and project it on the building. And really, Waterfront Park is a massive park that we have plenty of space to hold something like that. We have plenty of parking, and it would just be a nice event, and it would get some use out of the parks and get some of the community involved in a community event. But I would think that would be something that the CAC maybe want to talk about and see if there's any interest there in doing that with you guys organizing that, because there'll be some work that goes into it.
Well, the city would be our contact person for, because we have to go through the land trust. There are some hoops that we have to jump through, as well as, I know a couple of years ago, we had it at 4th of July. That was before I was involved up here. There were getting the movies and stuff, and there's a whole bunch going into that. So who would be the contact for that?
I think that you contact Mr. Dude ultimately, but I think that it's a passive park, so I think doing a movie in the park.
Passive uses, yeah. They don't want you to just put up like a softball field or something like that.
Right, but I think that the movie in the park
Projecting movie is a passive.
would probably be okay, and that'll be a question that maybe once we organize it, we can bounce off legal to make sure we're within our.
Now, you start bringing in vendors and such, and then you have issues.
Correct. And I remember I think they had an event out there, it was a movie in the park type of thing when I was there. And I remember that there was, the folks that did the grand opening actually donated a popcorn machine and a Kona ice machine for the kids. But there was no vendor, it was just free. So I don't think that would violate any of the
That was
rules
the
out there
4th
either.
of July. I think that was 4th of July.
That was one of the 4th of July, you're right. But I think that those folks, in my discussion with the owners, would probably do the same for us for a movie night in the park.
Heck, I think city used to have popcorn wagons, don't we still have
I'm not aware of one, but
that? Sal,
Sal may know where it
we used to have a
is.
really good barbecue grill too.
we'll do some looking in the corners.
Yeah, one event down there.
It was in the trunk of a police car that we sold.
One event down there we did, I think it was the 85th anniversary, and the PD was out there with the barbecue grill and just frying up burgers and dogs and handing them out. I think Walmart donated a whole bunch of dogs, dogs, burgers, and buns, and just handed them out.
I'll see if we can find one on city property. If not, there may be several
Well,
of
let me
us that
talk to
could
the
loan
COC
one.
before you go hunting for a barbecue grill.
I'm sure those folks have one too. As far, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Yes.
Procedurally, bureaucrats change, and so anything we're going to do at Waterfront, I would ask Shauna to make a call to our contact with state, just so it's on their radar. There's language about, normal park use, and then bringing in vendors and trucks and generators, and so they make that differentiation. But they're bureaucrats that, those people change.
I also want to add, you're correct, the FCT basically divides the state into zones, and there's a person responsible for our zone.
Right.
When we had, in the past, so much difficulty, it was because our person was out on extended leave.
Right.
And somebody else was covering for them, and they didn't want to approve anything.
Right.
And so it wasn't necessarily just because we ran into brick walls back then, we're going to run into the same brick walls.
Right. And in my experience so far, as long as we're doing lots of communication and we're jumping through their hoops,
Right, exactly.
but we keep them notified, we really have had very little pushback, no resistance. The things we've asked for permission have been approved. So a movie in the park is a pretty normal, non-intrusive. We're not digging holes. We're not leaking oil. We're not setting anything on fire. Maybe a hot dog. But as long as we've had those communications with that person, they've been pretty receptive and moved the paperwork along pretty quickly.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, and I expect most do, but the reason that there is a waterfront park and the money came through the FTC to purchase that park was as a natural park. So
Right.
it was never going to be, and it never will be, just a city park. So it's never going to, a lot like passive activities, absolutely. But as far as the things they've done, there's a ton of things they do out at Sims that we never can do.
No, I understand, and that's why it's.
I don't mean to say that you don't
No,
understand.
no, but Sims Park doesn't every weekend. I'm suggesting if we do a couple a year, it'd be nice, and I think we probably could. It'd be, but that's something that really, I think the CHC is really geared really well to put together.
I'll bring it up to them, absolutely.
So that's all I had on the boards and committees. If we can close that out, I wanted to move on to the consent agenda. Looking for a motion.
Motion to approve consent agenda.
So
All in favor?
Aye.
The first item up for council business is the Port Ritchie Vulnerability Assessment and Adaption Plan Overview. I'm going to pass that to Mr. Duke for introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pleased to have Sean with Houghton Associates.
Sean Wahab with Houghton Associates. He's going to give us an update on their work, working on our vulnerability assessment plan.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, staff, and members of the public. Really appreciate this opportunity to be with you today. I'm based out of Jacksonville, but love exploring this area, and I think you have a really nice community here. So we're looking forward to working with you on this project, and a lot of progress has already been made. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a comprehensive yet concise overview of the vulnerability assessment that HAF is currently developing for Port Ritchie. Beyond the vulnerability assessment, which is specifically concerned with flooding, we are also looking at a comprehensive plan amendment and an adaptation plan, which identifies specific assets that we can, pursue with grant funding. A little bit of background about myself before we get into the presentation. I have lived and worked all across the state of Florida, originally from Boynton Beach in Southeast Florida, lived through many hurricanes, experienced damage. My parents many years ago lost all of their business inventory in Big Pine Key in the Florida Keys to flooding. So this is a very personal challenge to me, and it's something that, take a lot of passion in. And before joining HAF Associates, which is a private sector engineering firm, I worked with the Northeast Florida Regional Council and have worked with dozens of governments on this exact issue. If you have any questions as I move through this presentation, no problem answering them as we go. And towards the end, we can have a back and forth discussion if there's any issue areas of concern. So if we go to the next slide. So just a brief background about HAF if you're not familiar. HAF Associates is a full-service engineering, architectural, and planning firm. We're based out of the southeastern United States with more than 27 offices. We also have more than 1,400 employees working from a diverse array of backgrounds on all sorts of different practices and initiatives. Our local office here in Florida is in Tampa. We also have offices in Orlando, Jacksonville, and Tallahassee. And our focus at HAF is improving lives and communities by turning ideas into realities. So we're focused on much more than planning. This is a planning project, but the focus is really positioning Port Richey to be successful over the long term. And outside of Port Richey, we are also working with a number of regions and governments across Florida right now on a broad array of issues related to flooding, sea level rise, hurricanes, and so forth. It's a very complicated challenge, but when you bring the right people together, you can solve a lot of these challenges through solutions. If we go to the next slide. So I just want to give you a brief background on the project team that has been assigned to Port Richey for this project. Sherry French is based out of our Tampa office. She's our project principal. She's a landscape architect. Again, my name is Sean LaHave. I am the project manager for this project. And then we have a number of engineers, water resource engineers, and then GIS staff people working to advance the goals and objectives of this project. But a lot of folks who are highly experienced from diverse backgrounds. And then Bruce Kasich, who's also in our Tampa office, is going to assist with identifying specific projects that might be eligible for design and construction activities. If we go to the next slide. Oop, no worries. So just to provide a little bit of background and context, last year the City of Port Richey applied for a grant from the FDEP Resilient Florida program. This program was established by Governor Ron DeSantis in May 2021 and is providing a number of funding opportunities and sources to local governments all across the state of Florida. This is a planning grant. I'll get more into the nuances of what money is available at the state level, but this grant is really focused on identifying vulnerabilities, planning for the future, and establishing a structure and framework to guide decisions. Fortunately for Port Richey, I think size is actually going to work to your favor in this study. A lot of larger municipalities, it's just a problem that is so overwhelming to solve because of geography. But with a smaller community, smaller population, I think this is where we're really going to be able to identify actionable and achievable solutions. This project will prepare a vulnerability assessment, which I will explain in a moment, a peril of flood comprehensive plan amendment, this is another statutory requirement, and then an adaptation plan. And then as mentioned before, the real focus here is on the future, and so how can we position Port Richey to pursue future grant funding opportunities to get construction and things actually in the ground. And if we keep moving forward in the presentation, so just want to articulate some goals and objectives for each of these separate tasks that are all being funded through this one project. The purpose of the vulnerability assessment based on state statutory requirements is to identify all publicly owned or maintained critical assets. So these are fire stations, pump stations, anything owned by the local government is really the focus of this study. Residential assets, commercial assets, those are broader categories that we can explore, but that's going to be something to kind of look at moving into the future. Once we collect all of this data for critical assets, we're going to overlay that with flood hazards and determine which assets are vulnerable to flooding, whether it be from the Gulf of Mexico, from rainfall. We're going to explore all sorts of different hazards to determine which assets are vulnerable. And then moving forward into the Peril of Flood Comprehensive Plan Amendment. So back when it was Governor Rick Scott in 2015, there was a change to Florida statute requiring local governments to incorporate future sea level rise planning into their comprehensive plan. This is a relatively straightforward task that we will help guide the city through. And then we're also working with Vrana Consulting, who is the city's planning consultant, to process all of that paperwork through DEO. And then finally, the adaptation plan. This is really where we connect outcomes from the vulnerability assessment into actionable, doable, and achievable recommendations that can be pursued over the next 5 years, 10 years, even 20 years. So we're thinking big picture, but we're also thinking next hurricane season, which is also very important. And if we go to the next slide. So this word resilience is popping up all across the state of Florida right now. It's hard to understand if you're not, closely paying attention to it. But when we're looking at resilience in the state of Florida, it's really utilized to look at water-based threats. So all across the United States, every community has a natural hazard that they face. But in Florida, the natural hazard that we're really, struggling to deal with is water, coming from all different directions. And so when we look at this term resilience, we're looking at the ability of a local community like Port Richey to bounce back after experiencing a loss of function from an event like a hurricane. But more importantly, it's about adapting moving into the future. So how do we live with water? How do we live with the natural environment rather than fight against it? And within this resilience framework, it's really important to recognize the difference between shocks and stresses. So shocks are sudden onset, immediate events that cause a loss of function. Think hurricanes, tornadoes, strong storms. So the image on the top right, that's from Flagler Beach in Northeast Florida. And as you can see, during Hurricane Matthew in 2016, all of A1A was completely destroyed because of erosion. So that happens immediately. But moving into the future, because of global climate trends and patterns, we're also seeing stresses take place. And this is something like sea level rise, where you're going to see more nuisance flooding, more king tides push into the streets, even if there's not a storm. So just high tides on the right day of year, that's going to have an impact on critical community functions and infrastructure. And the image on the right was also from a hurricane in Jacksonville in 2017. That was downtown Jacksonville, and the entire place was devastating with flooded. And if we move forward, so this is a little bit complicated, but over the next few months, this will start making more sense, especially as we start developing a report. But when it comes to sea level rise, we're relying on two different factors. So there's historical data for most places, where there's federally available tide gauge data. It's available all the way back to maybe 1930. And in most places across Florida, between 1930 to, let's say, 2020, there's been approximately 8 to 9 inches of sea level rise. And so that doesn't sound like a lot, but moving into the future, small incremental changes can have a devastating impact on your community. And so when we're looking into the future, regions across Florida and local governments have been relying on these sea level rise trends to understand where sea level trends are moving into the future. This data is sourced from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and then the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and outlines specific scenarios of what might happen, and then we can overlay that with a flood map. Moving forward, so this is just one example, and again, this is not our mapping product, this is a federally available data set. So this is showing mean high water in Port Richey as of basically, this year or the past few years. And so areas in green are areas that are low-lying and already prone to flooding. But if we move into the future with a 2-foot increase in sea level rise, which could happen over the next 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, there's so many different outcomes or variables that we have to look at. On the next slide, it'll show you what might potentially be impacted. And so as you can see, a lot of your existing conservation lands, natural areas will absorb some of those water impacts, but that's really just showing the importance of protecting those areas. But then in Port Richey, a big threat is with residential assets, and so especially towards the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of homes might have some issues moving into the future, but this is an important time to kind of get ahead of those trends. And then if we keep going, and so this is really something that I want to emphasize in this presentation. So the Resilient Florida program, it's been around for about 2 years now, has 3 different sources of funding. So the funding that's supporting this project, there's about $20 million a year available for planning projects. You guys are already ahead of that. But then the most important funding source is the statewide flooding and sea level rise resilience plan, which is being administered by FDEP out of Tallahassee. Every single year moving into the future, for the foreseeable future, there's a minimum of $100 million that will be available to local governments across Florida. And so these are competitive funds. There was more than $2.3 billion in request last year or the year before that, and only about $500 million was funded, and the $500 million was made possible through ARPA funding provided to the state. But in the future, according to the legislature, there's going to be a minimum of $100 million, so this is a very important thing to keep in mind as we navigate this discussion. And then very briefly, there's a small category for regional resilience entities. The Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, who we are currently contracted with, they're leading a regional effort as of now to identify best practices for vulnerability assessments, and we might be looking at scaling up what we're doing with Port Richey to apply it to other regions, or not other regions, but other municipalities across the Tampa Bay area. And if we keep moving forward, and so I'll briefly, touch on these elements, and the presentation will be made available afterwards. But Section 380.093 in Florida statutes explains very explicitly what needs to be involved in a vulnerability assessment. And so the focus of the state of Florida is on publicly owned critical assets, but that's just the bare minimum. Now, when we're looking at the asset categories or asset classes in the statute, there's 4 categories. The first is transportation assets and evacuation routes, and you can see some of those things like airports, bridges, bus terminals, ports. Then we have critical infrastructure, water treatment plants, lift stations, critical community and emergency facilities, fire station, and then we have natural, cultural, and historical resources, which Port Richey has quite a few of. And then beyond the critical asset requirements, if we go to the next slide, so there's one slide missing, or we'll get back to that. So these are draft maps that have already been produced by HAF over the past 2 months to look at critical assets located across the community. This is a map with nothing on it. It just shows the boundaries, but this is sort of the base map that we're looking at. And then if we move forward, this is where we start in getting into identifying what your critical assets are and where those are located. So for the first category, this is the transportation assets map. It shows major roadways, minor roadways, and other transportation assets. And so ultimately, when we get into the next phase of the project over the next 3 months, we're going to overlay the flood data with this critical asset data and determine where those intersections exist. And then if we keep going, there's a few more maps to show you. This is critical infrastructure. And so this is looking at communication facilities and other elements. It's very hard to see on this screen, but each critical asset is represented by a point on the map. And then, yes, and if there's a legend, I can't really see it from here. Yep. And then if we go to the next one, this is a very interesting one, critical community and emergency facilities. And so all of that is mapped out. You see one area, I believe that's a school, shaded in blue. And then if we go to the final map, which has the most going on, these are all of your natural, cultural, and historical resources. And so all of this work has already been completed. When we start, or in terms of the critical asset data, when we started this project, it appeared that Port Richey had very limited GIS resources. And so one thing to be thinking about beyond this project, you now have all of your critical assets mapped in a geodatabase. And so when we're looking at comprehensive planning, land use changes, this is a resource that you can use practically for anything, nothing to do with flooding. And if we keep moving forward, so this was the slide that I thought was taken away. So beyond the critical assets, Florida statute also outlines all of the flood hazards that have to be evaluated. And so tidal flooding, this is, again, it can happen without a storm, just high tides pushing water into the streets. We're going to be looking at future high tide flooding. Many areas across Florida, as of 2023, maybe experience 4 days a year of pretty high tide flooding. But looking into the future, some of those communities might experience 40 to 50 days of severe high tide flooding. So that's something we will be looking at. And then current and future storm surge, with Hurricane Ian in mind that recently passed over Florida, we will be looking at existing areas where storm surge, would inundate. But then adding sea level rise to that equation, if you add a foot of sea level rise, that's going to push storm surge even further inland. So that's something that will be evaluated. And then this is a little bit more complicated from an engineering and modeling perspective, but we will do our best to look at rainfall-induced flooding, impacts on stormwater, and then compound flooding, which occurs when you have, let's say, a hurricane event and a high tide happen at the same time. What happens when those variables come together? And then continuing to move forward, I know this is a lot of information, so I'm hoping that we can reflect on it at the end of this. This is just for your own notes later on, but these are the requirements of the parallel flood statute. Again, this is a comprehensive plan amendment. and it's focused on incorporating future condition planning for sea level rise and other flood elements into your comprehensive plan, which might ultimately inform your land development regulations. And then we have a few more, or several more slides. And another important thing to understand and reflect on as we navigate this process, there's key terms that really should be understood to really, maximize the utility of the vulnerability assessment. So what we're about to do over the next 2 to 3 months is an exposure analysis. That's simply overlaying the flood data with the critical asset data and determining which critical assets are geographically exposed to flooding. But not all assets react the same to flooding. And so on the right, we have 2 example images. You have a house at ground level and then a home that is elevated on stilts. These can be 2 neighboring homes. I've seen, circumstances like this in Port Richey near the Gulf. The house at ground level during a devastating flood event will most likely be flooded. The home on stilts will not be flooded. It can withstand that impact. And so that's when we get into sensitivity. How do assets respond? What changes might need to take place? And that's really where we get to the big picture. And then finally, in terms of key terms, adaptation strategies refer to solutions that can help you move past and overcome those challenges. And then implementation really gets to budgeting, planning, staffing, grant funding, and so forth. And then on the next slide, this is just a rough overview of what the vulnerability assessment will be comprised of. So we've already completed the critical asset data collection, and now we're moving forward with the flood hazard analysis. We have coastal engineers, water resource engineers currently conducting that assessment. And within about 4 to 5 months, we'll have a final report that details all of the findings from the study and assessment. It will include comprehensive maps, and then you will also have a GIS geodatabase software that you can access all of this information on a computer. And then in terms of the adaptation plan, on the next slide, so once we're done with the vulnerability assessment, we're going to reconvene with the steering committee that was established, comprised of city staff, the fire chief, police chief, and we're going to be looking at specific projects that we might be able to explore. Beyond identifying, CIP projects and opportunities, we're also going to be looking at creating a menu of options for you to pursue on your own once this project is done. So it's really going to be sort of an encyclopedia of sorts, where depending on the circumstance, the local conditions, here's the most appropriate solution. And then if we keep going. So in closing this presentation, I have a few final reflections that I think would be worthy, and sorry, my mouth's a little dry, I think would be worthy of pursuing here at the local level. And so one of the first opportunities is you trying to get some water. Thank you so much. Thank you. Sorry. No worries. I really appreciate it. Thank you. That'll come off. So one of the most immediate opportunities that exist, there is a bipartisan national organization referred to as the American Flood Coalition. They are based out of Washington, D.C., but have a very strong Florida presence. And so over the past few years, they have hosted a Florida Mayor Summit, which mayors from all across the state come together to tackle the issues, talk about it, and pursue legislative priorities in D.C. and Tallahassee. I'm very well connected with the American Flood Coalition. HAF is also a member. It's free of charge. I look at it as more of a resource for you all, but it's something that I think is relatively straightforward and is showing both to your community members and to the state of Florida that you're taking this seriously. And then on a second recommendation, we also have a strong relationship with Florida's Chief Resilience Officer, Dr. Wesley Brooks. He reports directly to Governor Ron DeSantis in Tallahassee, and he is Florida's primary contact for this funding and for these priorities. He's been making his rounds all across the state of Florida, talking to local governments, community members. So I think either inviting him here, having a virtual meeting, would be a great idea to get connected with what's going on in Tallahassee. Something else to start thinking about, as we continue forward, is to identify wish list capital improvement projects for short-term consideration. At our project kickoff meeting with city staff in December, there was a discussion about Port Richey's fire station and maybe applying for funding to relocate that fire station, especially in the face of flooding and future flooding. And so one of the unique advantages, no problem. One of the unique advantages that HAF brings to the table is we have a dedicated team of grant funding experts who can support Pamela Lynch and others with the city in, identifying those projects, getting quick cost estimates, and then submitting them for funding. So that's something really to think about. With September around the corner, that's the deadline for FDP's next cycle of resilience funding. And again, there's $100 million available. So if the fire station was an immediate priority and that's something you were interested in looking at, that's something I think we can move forward pretty quickly, especially because we'll have the data to back it. And then more from an aspirational and community visioning perspective, moving into the next few years, identifying people who understand these issues across your community, both within government and across the residential and commercial space, I think will be really important to championing all of the things that have to be accomplished and gaining buy-in from the community. And then finally, if you're not familiar, Port Richey is a member of the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, and so they have a very robust effort referred to as the Tampa Bay Regional Resiliency Coalition that represents the interests of all of the counties in this area. And so they host an annual summit once a year that brings together leaders, academics, scientists to discuss the big picture and what opportunities are out there. We have a fantastic relationship with those folks and would be more than happy to connect you with them, either at the staff or elected official level. And then there's a lot of local and regional workshops taking place right now and moving into the future. Pinellas County and St. Petersburg, as of last month, hosted a workshop that brought together all of the municipalities to talk about this exact issue. So we're seeing that collaboration is a key ingredient for success here. But we're working pretty quickly and effectively, and we'll have more results to talk about over the next few months. And then I have one final slide just as a reflection, or before getting there. This is just an example flood map that we produced. This looks like Wakulla County in the Appalachia region of Florida, and then we have Jefferson County as well. And so this was conducted last year, but it shows you some of the final outcomes that are to be expected from the vulnerability assessment. So this looks like transportation assets and maybe something else, but shows all of the flood boundaries of what's the extent of inundation and what critical assets are going to be or are currently going to be inundated. And then the final picture on this next slide, this is a really important message that I talk to almost every community I work with about. This is a photo from Mexico Beach in 2018 following Hurricane Michael, which was a devastating Category 5 hurricane. And so when Hurricane Michael hit Mexico Beach and the Florida Panhandle, a lot of people really were not prepared. They didn't understand the effects that could unfold. And as you see here, this individual homeowner built his or her house resiliently. They invested the funds, they invested the money, they elevated it on stilts, and this house is perfectly fine. But the entire community around this home was completely devastated. And so, about a month ago, I went out to the Panhandle, went out to Mexico Beach. We're talking 5 years later, and you can still feel the impacts of that event. All of the trees in that area are pointing 45 degrees north. A lot of lots are vacant. There's still construction going on. So a lot of people think about a hurricane as a shock. It just happens and you move on. But once these types of events happen, it's really difficult to move on. And then lastly as well, about a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I was also in Fort Myers and Sanibel Island, went over the bridge in Sanibel. And, 3 to 4 months after Ian hit Sanibel Island and Pine Island in that area, it's still completely devastated. You have contractors and consultants all working quickly on emergency repairs. So it's a pretty devastating situation. And I think the goal here is to prevent that from happening anywhere in this area. And with that said, more than happy to answer any questions. My contact information is on the last slide of the PowerPoint, and I also have business cards, but more than happy to have a discussion as well.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for all the time and the work that you put into this. And I think that's one of the biggest things or challenges we've had in this area is flood mitigation.
Whether it's on a day-to-day basis,
Heavy rains and tides coming in.
versus when hurricanes come through. I know that the first thing we do is we pull a tide chart up to figure out when we have high tides versus when the storm's coming. Because, obviously those are the type of impacts that you plan as much as you can, but sometimes it's just a natural disaster. It is what it is. But I think that the planning for the aftermath is probably one of the most important things we can do. I think as a city, we've done really well in terms of planning to prepare up front, getting emergency services. And I know one of the things that you've touched on, the discussion I've had with Mr. Policastro is what do we do with all these beautiful police equipment or fire equipment that we have that is at a fire station that is across the street from a canal that's likely to flood. So, we've had those discussions. So I appreciate, the work that you're putting in. And one of the questions that I had for you is I know that you touched on grant programs, and we like grant money as much as we can in a small community. And one of the grants that's touched this community and is very valuable is the FEMA grant, which elevates homes that are the block home that we saw a picture of that's generally devastated, and they elevate it up so all the living spaces upstairs, I think 10 feet or higher, I think is the FEMA standard. And FEMA's taken an active position that they would rather pay up front to lift the homes than to come in and repair them afterwards. So the question that I had for you is, as we put this resiliency plan together, will that have an impact on the ability to get additional flood mitigation in terms of FEMA grants and that sort of thing? And I didn't know if you knew the answer to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as I mentioned before, the Florida statutory requirements, those are only applicable to Florida grant funding sources. But you can use the vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan as leverage in going after the larger federal sources. Okay. So that's something that I think as we especially get into the adaptation planning stage, if you want to target that, that's something we can put emphasis and attention on. And then we also have a grant expert at HAF with more than 30 years of experience. I think she's brought grants in, totaling $300 million for local governments. She specializes in the FEMA programs, and I've already been talking to her about, opportunities for Port Richey. So that's something I would say the next 3 to 4 months and onwards, that's what we're going to be looking at, is where the opportunities exist. And as was mentioned previously before my presentation, there's thousands of grant funding opportunities. So how do you really target the ones that are going to get the most bang for your buck, are going to be cost effective and achievable? So that's something that we're going to try to focus on is, identifying that short list or priority list of grant funding programs and then matching that with projects, even with residential assets.
I want to jump in and say too, as long as I've been in this city, and I'm sure probably before that, the discussion of moving the firehouse has been always out there. This is not a new thing. Going back 20 years, we were talking about moving the firehouse out back there. That's one point. The other point, Mexico Beach is a pretty good corollary to this city, in as much as you had in Mexico Beach a mix of properties, older single-family homes, ground level. And you notice you pointed out on that one slide, the house was still standing. Well, that was a newer house facing the Gulf of Mexico. Somebody came in, bought a brand spanking new house, built to current code.
Yes.
There was an awful lot of properties up there that, that was an area that had been, I think there were mobile home parks, small single family bungalow types that have been around for decades and decades and decades. And Port Richey is similar to that. So when it comes to elevating houses in Port Richey, it invariably is houses that are older, single-family waterfront houses.
Correct.
Because that's where the value is to elevate a house. When you're done, you got a very valuable piece of property. You get off the waterfront, now it becomes cost prohibitive. I believe, especially up until now, anyway, you had to pre-fund this, and then you look for your grant money after you were done.
Reimbursable, yes.
It's reimbursable. So,
Right.
You go into a house right now that's 5 houses off the water, doesn't have a water view, it's a standard size lot, it's a 40-year-old house, to come in and elevate it and expect to get your money out of it, you're just not going to do it. It's kind of like a non-starter. So I don't know how that's ever going to factor out. I mean, when you look at it from a federal level, we're talking, trillions of dollars to do things like that, to just elevate houses all over.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know where you go from there.
No, I think that's a great point to mention. And, you know, one nuance that I would like to share in terms of elevation, I've spoken to a number of property owners who had flood insurance and their house was severely flooded during, you know, a recent hurricane event, you know, in places all across Florida. And so they collected the flood insurance premium, but then went to the local government to get a construction permit. But because it was more than 50% damaged, FEMA is saying,
You have to build the standard.
yes.
You have to build the standard, you know, and your insurance is never gonna build the standard.
And so I think part of the obstacle ahead is going to be when these situations start occurring more frequently, how do you solve it comprehensively? And I also just want to point out that, you know, property elevation, it's only one tool in the toolbox. I usually go a little bit deeper into it, but it's a lot to kind of unpack. But the solutions that we will be exploring are protection, so that's like a seawall, actually keeping water completely out, avoidance, which is maintaining conservation lands, allowing water space to move. And then there's other options like accommodation. So that's going back to the elevated house concept. You're allowing water to come in, but not actually damage the asset. And then the worst case scenario, and this is something that I don't think any of us want to explore, but there's a concept of, you know, managed retreat. You know, certain houses are going to be so vulnerable or flood prone that it's better off removing it from the housing stock and finding a better option. There's grant funding for that as well, but I think that's the last case scenario, and it's something that we usually don't explore until all options have been exhausted.
Well, and there's also, mitigation, you know, specifically for very short-term flooding events, like, heavy rains, a very quick king tide. that
Yes.
were at very few inches or whatever, were, if there was just funding available to basically tighten the house up, so to speak,
Doors, garages, things like that, to where, you know, a house can withstand a minimal flood event
with far less damage.
than they could without that. And I'm thinking mostly specifically older structures in low-lying areas.
That's a great point.
You know, I mean, again, building standards now are, if you want to
Build a house on a lot, you gotta build up the lot. Well, these houses are down in bolts, you know, you can't build up a lot underneath a house unless you elevate a house. So, again, there's a lot of ways to mitigate different levels. You're exactly right. I live on the south side of the city.
So does the lady in red behind you there. She lives right in the river, and she'll tell you she sees the
Water coming up onto the street in front of her house more than she did years ago, because she's been living there for a long time. And it's not an infrequent event during the king tide for the water to come lapping up on, she'll show you. She got a picture for you.
Thank you.
That's the front yard.
I lived there for a
It's
while.
the yard.
But you had a plan to get out of town,
Pretty crazy. Yeah, and these
Yeah.
pictures that she's sharing,
And then you see somebody driving through.
it's remarkable the challenges we're facing. And these pictures that she's sharing, when my colleague and I came to Port Richey in December, we drove around, did some site visits to understand what everything looked like. And we were there on the perfect day because there was water everywhere, a lot of ponding in residential areas, and it seemed like it was just a, you know, average rain event. And so that's going to be a big focus of ours, is to understand where those local complaints are. And I think that's probably where we can work best together in terms of city council and the consultant team. If we can, you know, engage you all to understand what your constituents are voicing in terms of problems and issue areas, and we can, you know, narrow down what exact neighborhoods need to be evaluated, that's going to, you know,
Yeah, and the other thing, you know, that's
starting to rear its ugly head now, and it's only gonna get worse after this last hurricane, is the exorbitant cost of flood insurance.
yes.
again, you take a house built in
In
the
the 1960s,
on a standard lot, and the cost of insuring it, there are an awful lot of people that are going,
they just cannot afford, they're living on limited incomes, they live in a house that is just, you know, again, to what you were saying, upwards to $10,000, $15,000 of an insurance bill for a house that, what are they actually gonna pay you out if it gets damaged? It doesn't make any sense. Basically, just you self-insure and hope nothing happens.
and there's a lot more of that going on.
On year after year after year.
The other, I wanted, when you're done, I was gonna.
Yeah, that's fine.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is, one of the other issues that we've had in this community that I've seen over my tenure is, you have the county and their stormwater, and they move their stormwater and they try and get it all the way out to the river and the Gulf, which has to flow through the city, okay? So is the resiliency plan gonna look at and take into consideration that the county's moving water too, and trying to push it through the city and out to where we have the tides coming up the other way, trying to push it back the other way? And that's one of the concerns that I have, and that we've talked about engaging the county, because, you know, my fear is the county has a lot more resources than we do as a small city. So if they push water through and they just dump it here and they leave it here, it's a big problem and not something that we're going to be able to afford to fix, versus work with the county to see if we can have a mutual game plan to push it all the way out into, you know, efficiently and clean as it can be out into ultimately the Gulf. So I didn't know if the resiliency plan is going to touch on the stormwater issues as well.
Yeah, that's a really great question and a great point. So in terms of, you know, these variables that are happening in real time and that we're dealing with, you know, as we go, that's very difficult to capture in flood maps, especially when we're looking at NOAA data or Army Corps data. But the good news is sometime over the next 2 months, it looks like Pasco County is about to launch their own vulnerability assessment process. And so a huge focus for the state of Florida is interjurisdictional collaboration. That's really what I specialize in, is regional planning, county-wide approaches to resilience. And so, for example, I worked with Flagler County a few years ago on the Atlantic Ocean, and every one of the municipalities within Flagler worked together to address this from a comprehensive manner. What's our responsibility? What's your responsibility? And so while I can't give you the detailed specifics on, you know, what effects that will have, that's certainly something that I think can be explored through dialogue. And as they begin their vulnerability assessment and resilience planning process, it's going to be really important for Port Richey to have that conversation, identify those nexuses. I think that's where, you know, the synergies are going to exist.
And the reason I brought that up is, within the last few years, they've been funded about $5.1 million too, just in stormwater. And I know they bought like a golf course, and they did away with the golf course and they used it as water retention. So the landscape of what the county is doing is very close to our city borders, and all that's going to come into play. And as a small city, we don't have engineers to go out there and say that, gee, this is going to have X, Y, and Z impact on the city. So one of the beautiful things, and one of the things that I liked about this resiliency plan, was to maybe able to tie that into what the county's doing to protect the city, to make sure that whatever they do doesn't flow into here and just create a big problem that we're not going to be able to afford to fix. So that was one of the things that I wanted to raise as my concern for our people that pay taxes here in Port Richey, is that Pasco County isn't going to push water in and we won't be able to afford to redirect it. And you know, I think you guys will be able to at least recognize that,
Yes,
and point us in the right direction, so we can have that dialogue and try and avoid that predicament.
absolutely. Hey, great points.
So those were the couple points that I had when I reviewed the materials, and I appreciate you giving the information, and look forward to working with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And just want to say as well, I think the unique thing about kind of the relationship that we're going to have over the next year is that as we start to identify problems, we have resources out the wazoo in terms of, you know, who can help, who can assist. And so the fire station is just a perfect example of how planning can actually translate into action pretty quickly. And so, you know, the thought process with the fire station, if that's identified as a priority for the city, we submit it for grant funding, maybe for design. That's something that HAF can, you know, we can build off of this and really look at the future. So anything that's identified out of here, we have expertise and folks who can really dig into the details, and I think that's what we're looking forward to, just helping you not only now in the immediate, you know, term with this grant, but over the long term and over the next decade. So we really appreciate it.
Thanks again for what you do. And
Absolutely.
if there's no further questions, I think we'll move on to the next item.
Have a good evening. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
So the next item is going to be to adopt resolution 20-02, and that's to amend fiscal year 2023 stormwater budget. I'm going to pass that to Mr. Duke for introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This was the outcome, the necessary required budget amendment based on the stormwater rate increase passed 3 weeks ago. If we have any, I request a motion to approve. If you have any more detailed questions, Ms. Goslin will help us with that.
So just to clarify, this is the portion of the stormwater budget where originally when we did the budget, based on the calculated income at $3 a bill or whatever, we would have a certain amount at the end. Now this changes it. Obviously, the last 6 months it's $750, I think, is what it was set to by council. So that amount reflects the difference then in the next 6 months between the $3 and the $750.
Yeah, so we will receive an additional $9,250.
So the question that I had is that money that's coming into the stormwater fund, how does that relate to, I guess, expenditures? In other words, is that because has that been budgeted, the $99,250?
Yeah, so that's why you have that resolution in front of you, is to increase the budget by that amount to reflect the rate increase. So will that cover all the expenses? Unfortunately, it will not. There's about $40,000 that we're still off in salaries and benefits. And that's only because we're increasing it for 6 months. So if we had increased it for an entire year, it would have absolutely covered the entire budget. But because it's only a 6-month period that the increase is taking place, it will not.
So with this amendment, we have the additional $99,250, but you're saying there's still a $40,000 deficiency coming into. So the question is, where does that deficiency come from?
It would come from fund balance,
Just the general fund?
the stormwater fund balance.
Yeah, but if it's not there, huh? I guess I'm trying to figure out, would there be enough money in the coffers to cover those expenses?
Potentially, yes. I have not received our audited financial statements yet, though, from FY22. So once I receive those, we can look at those during the budget process.
Is there any way that we as a city can crunch the numbers to know whether or not we're gonna make our budget and be able to fund our budget?
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at that as well. It's tough to say. I don't believe that there's going to be sufficient fund balance now. So technically, it would be borrowing from the general fund. I mean, this has been going on for multiple years that we've been in the red in this fund. So it's not surprising at all. And so that's why we were trying to, do it as soon as possible. But we can absolutely look at that during the budget process. And if we find we need to increase the rate more, we can certainly present that at that time.
Because I wanted to see what options we have once we know whether or not there's going to be a deficiency. If there's no deficiency, it's just a non-issue, I would think. If there's a deficiency, that's something that I wanted to look at fairly closely.
Yeah, more than likely there will be, and we will need to look at that during the budget process.
And as soon as you realize that if there's going to be a deficiency, will you guys put it back on for a discussion?
Well, I'm looking at the paperwork in front of me here, and essentially all I see that we're doing now that we've raised the money is we're pulling FTEs out of the general fund, and we're paying with stormwater, exactly what I was reluctant for us to do. All these increased charges are all personnel that are already on staff. So if we're funding about the stormwater right now, all we're doing is we're moving their salaries out of the general fund into the stormwater fund. So now that increase we did in stormwater fees has done nothing but finance people that we're already paying.
Right.
It's not being paid out of the general fund.
But that means we should have surplus in our general fund.
Yeah.
That's what
We're now subsidizing, we're using the utility, we're using the stormwater fee to subsidize the general fund, yeah.
No, it never covered the FTEs for the stormwater fund in the first place.
So are we hiring people?
No, we are not.
So the dollar, I'm looking at dollar amounts that are going up.
Correct.
And it's
We're
it's
funding
dollar
it
amounts.
adequately now, so that's why the budget has increased.
I'm sorry, what?
We're funding it adequately for the FTEs, so that's why the budget has increased, since we've increased the rates to compensate for that. But we are not hiring additional staff. This
I
is the
know
same
you're
staff
not-
that we presented to
No, I
you.
agree you're not hiring additional staff. I'm just saying executive salary. Original appropriation 6,000, now it's 18,000. I'm looking at,
Correct, it's to reflect-
finance and administration. It was 2,350, now it's 6,008. We're shifting over staff, the cost of staff out of departments into stormwater.
Weren't we doing it before?
Let's, hold on. I wanted to let Mr. Duke respond to answer, I think, your inquiry here.
So when we put the budget together last year, there was a crystal clear decision made by this body to not budget in the deficit. And so those funds to pay for stormwater activities, not general fund activities, but what Rachel and I have tried to do in the budgeting process is to allocate to each fund an appropriate, reasonable amount of each salary. Each guy that goes out and does the stormwater work, there's a certain portion of legal that should be paid for by stormwater. There's a certain portion of my salary, of Rachel's, and so we did that
Can I
last.
stop you there just for a second?
Yes, sir.
And that's the same methodology, in essence, that we use for the CRA.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I know where you're going with this. Okay.
So, but this body decided not to allocate what we think are reasonable amounts for stormwater because it would have exacerbated the being in the red. Even with the rate increase, you're still in the red. And we can shift those expenses back to the general fund, but there's no, it's not like we got a windfall with the rate increase. We can move some of those expenses to accurately show. Now, we can quibble over whether, my salary is 5,000 stormwater or 3 or 15. But Rachel and I have really spent a lot of time and energy to try to make sure that the allocations to each fund, stormwater, sewer, water, are reasonable. That if somebody looked at it and said, really, how much of legal's time is spent on stormwater, that number reflects that. And so even though we've raised the rates, which your expert told you was you didn't get all the expenses covered, we can leave them in the general fund, we can push them over to water if you want. But it's not necessarily an accurate reflection of what it costs to run stormwater.
And that's what we paid a lot of money for that expert to tell us, and we chose as a body, I did not, but we chose as a body not to follow their recommendations. So we knew he suggested, or the company suggested, to cover stormwater, all the processes involved in stormwater was $11+, and this body chose to do $750, so common sense says we're still in the red, because we did not follow the recommendation, which was this body's choice, and that's fine.
But if I may, what we didn't fund was additional salaries and/or capital projects. Because if you looked at what those funds were for, one of the things that I was frankly disappointed with the evaluation is rather than Stantec coming in and saying, the city decide you need X, Y, and Z employees to run your stormwater, they just simply asked our staff, how many people do you want? And they said, well, we need 2 more.
That was a very small portion of it, but that was not all,
My
the
point
entire
is,
difference.
is their budgeting based on what, someone telling them that we would like 2 extra people, so we'll just budget and put it in. And that's the issue that I had with that portion of the study.
Right.
That having been said, I think that if I understood it correctly, the normal operating budget without the extra salaries and without the capital improvements would have been $7.50. And
Over an
But-
annual
but-
period, though.
over an annual period.
Correct.
But
So
those 2
this is
extra
6
people they were
months.
asking for, that was the discussion up here, was we were still paying those people because we were taking them out of public works, putting them into stormwater, so we were still paying them.
Right, whether
Out of the
it's
stormwater fund, not out of the
enterprise fund.
enterprise fund, is that
Right.
correct? We moved their hours? Am I speaking out of turn? I don't know.
No, you're right.
So, I mean, so whether we hire 2 more people, we didn't hire the 2 more people to keep the people in public works, but those people are still there. So we didn't hire them, but they're still working in stormwater drainage when necessary. So we're still paying $11 because we have to move those people over there to take care of what needs to be taken care of. I mean, they're doing on the south side, they're doing maintenance right now. We have to pay more than one person. We only have one person in stormwater maintenance. We only have one person, is from what my recollection is. There was more than one person taking care of the south side stormwater today. Maintenance.
But there's times when the stormwater person's doing other things too, other than stormwater,
I
so.
don't know that, but,
That's my understanding, so that's why they're saying there's a shift.
By necessity.
Right.
There's more than enough stormwater work to keep that one guy busy.
Oh, I'm sure, okay.
More than enough. And there are some projects that can't be done with one guy.
And that's kind of always been my point. I mean, there is stormwater work that is, we have a stormwater employee because there is stormwater work that's like, has to do with collection of data and reporting and all of that. That is very stormwater specific. Then we have Public Works, that's what this is all about. Public Works does Public Works. Public Works goes out and works on the stormwater, the same with utilities. So basically, again, we are reallocating funds to, we got the same people. We're not gonna hire more people. Same guys are gonna be doing what they did before. We're just now taking part of their salary out of a different fund than we were taking it out of before, now that we have the funds available. Essentially true.
Well, I think the presumption that the guy is doing the work, I mean, we can allocate him wherever you want. Like I said, what Rachel and I tried to do was make the allocations accurate to the work that they're doing and to the work that needs to be done. When we take two guys out of, utilities to go do stormwater stuff, I know you think the work gets done, but they're not doing utilities work. The bottom line is there's not enough bodies to do all the work.
Right.
There isn't.
But this is not addressing that. Again, this is just.
No, I mean, we've got a couple of issues to wrestle with, and one is, if you're not comfortable with how the funds, how the expenses have been allocated to stormwater, we can change that. We can get rid of the deficit, but it pushes an expense somewhere else. I mean, it either goes to water or sewer or general fund.
Again, all I'm doing is I'm making clear what I'm seeing right here. Okay, obviously, our stormwater rate we have increased it from 3 to 750. We had to do that 2.5 times, yeah.
Right.
Bottom line is, nothing new is getting done. You're basically telling me we are now reallocating funds that should have been allocated there in the first place now that we have it. So there's no net gain to having raised our stormwater rate other than it balances the books better.
It's adequately funding the budget now.
However you want to phrase it.
Yeah. And the point is, by next year's budget, with this money coming in, we'll be able to run without shifting stuff around. That's what we're talking about here.
Correct. However, I mean, there's already 3% increase incorporated into the union contracts, and this doesn't compensate for that. So we would need to look at that as well.
But if we're shifting small percentages, we've done that. I mean, that's just the nature of a small city. We've done that every budget season,
Right, so you would just advise us if he wants to shift salaries out of stormwater, we can do that, but it's gonna increase other funds.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all understand. I mean, we're approving a budget. That's all we're doing here. So that's.
So I think the recommendation, this is an action item, is to approve the amendment, budget amendment. And I was looking for a motion.
I move to approve the resolution number 23-02 to amend the FY 2023 stormwater budget.
I'll say. Jim used to always read.
So we have a motion, a second.
Resolution.
And what I was going to do is before we vote, I wanted,
I'm sorry, shouldn't we have done the read by title only thing?
we're going to read by title only, and then I wanted to open up to the general public for commentary. Thanks.
Resolution 23-02, a resolution of the City of Port Richey, Florida, amending the operating budget to appropriate additional revenues and expenditures of $99,250 to the stormwater utilities account for the fiscal year beginning October 1st, 2022 and ending September 30th, 2023, and providing for an effective date.
Thank you. At this time, we have a motion, a second. This is kind of a big action item, so I want to open it up to the general public for any kind of commentary. Seeing no hands, nobody signed up at this time, we'll call it to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next item on council business, which is a surplus of impounded vehicles. So I'm going to pass that to Mr. Duke for introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you can see in the background summary, there's 15 vehicles that have been impounded. PD has gone through the appropriate steps and they are ready to be approved as surplus to be sent to auction. If you have any detailed questions, I'm sure Chief Robinson can fill us in.
The only question that I had, the only issue that we normally run into with these are notice issues. Did we make sure we got the appropriate notices out before we?
If they were approved. Yes, they were approved by the previous attorney. Everything's
Okay.
signed.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it didn't slip through the cracks with the change.
We
Okay.
improved them.
I'm comfortable if Mr. Matthews reviewed them. So I
move to surplus the impound vehicle.
Second.
all in favor?
Pretty standard.
So the last thing that I wanted to bring up for council business is introduce the approval of the July 1st, 2023 fireworks show for introduction to Mr. Duke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this body, we discussed doing our fireworks show on the 1st of July. That's the Saturday. We've got a number of quotes. Sean has done a great job of working with a number of different vendors, so there's some various prices, and we can talk about that. But what I really need is your guidance. If we do it on the 1st, on Saturday, we're doubling up with Newport. The Claire fireworks show is that same evening. And so, there's a couple of possibilities. We'll put it on a different evening. July 4th is really not an option. The vendors we've been in contact with are kind of busy that day for some reason. They do fireworks. Friday night, Saturday night, later might be an option. If we started at 9:30, 9:40, Newport would be done by then. But doing it on a Friday, a Sunday, or a Monday is also, the vendors aren't available. This is what I'm saying. So I guess I'm looking for your guidance. I don't want to lock in a vendor if you really don't, for Saturday, if you really don't want to double up on Newport. If it's no big deal, we'll, had some conversations with Mr. Colombo on how to improve the fireworks display. We've got vendors that are willing to do that. It comes down to a matter of, do you want to spend $20,000, $25,000, $30,000? But the date is probably the most important thing right now. The vendors can add or subtract to the show, but they need a date. And I know you all had talked about, we don't want to double up on Newport, but Newport's going to have their show on Saturday the 1st.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify, July 1st is that Saturday before?
Yes, sir.
The 4th?
Yes. And that was the date we'd all talked about, and that looked good to us, and my marching instructions were to go out and find out what Newport's doing. They're doing it on that same evening.
And I wanted to break this discussion up. I think the first part of the discussion that we have is whether or not we want to do it July 1st or change the date. Before we get into the vendors, how much we're going to spend. Are you guys okay, just discussion that kind of narrow?
Oh, yeah, they're
Okay.
two different subjects.
So I'm for keeping it on July 1st. I think that Saturday is going to be the right time to do it. And I think what we should do is, I think there's going to be a time frame that Newport Ritchie sets off their fireworks. Let's say they start theirs at 8:30 or 9 and they're done by 9:30. Just stagger it and do it after.
Yeah, let me jump in real quick there, having done it before and having watched Newport Ritchie doing it before. It is pretty much, given that the sunset on July 4th never changes. It only changes by a second or two, okay? It is basically dark enough to shoot fireworks at 10 to 15 after 9, usually around actually 12 minutes after 9. When you hit that perfect point where the sky is dark enough to where you get the effects out of the colors, that's when basically everybody shoots their fireworks show. So there's no way Newport's starting at 8:30. It's not happening. So again, now if just following that scenario, if Newport starts shooting at 10 after 9 and they're done by 9:30,
we started at 9:30.
and then, yeah, but do we now have like a stampede of cars heading up 19 and streaming into the park to get into our show? I mean,
If we're just gonna schedule our show to start exactly when their show ends, what's the point, you know, I mean,
Are they,
people are choosing one show or the other. If we do it at the same time, or we just don't do it concurrently, it's basically saying people are gonna either come to
is
our
Newport
show. or
Richie
the other.
also doing Kia Fest at the same time?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, they always, they have.
So
they
there's
have
gonna be
big-
music
big all
and
kinds of
all
stuff.
sorts of stuff down there afterwards,
But you
and
can,
vendors.
but the point is even if you stagger them, you can see the fireworks on both. I mean, sitting anywhere in the city, you can see their fireworks go off and then watch ours.
My house, yeah.
Well, mine, I sit out in my backyard and watch theirs go up too, so.
But yeah, but you're looking across the bayou.
Well, that's where the fireworks show
Yeah,
for our
but
city is.
only
about.
about 6 houses have that view, Scott.
Well, I'm just suggesting that.
I think I think backing up to Newport Richie is a lot of money. I love going to our city for the fireworks.
Yes.
But I think backing it up with Newport Richie, I don't think we're gonna get a lot of people, because they're gonna be going to Kia Fest, they're gonna be doing the vendors, they're gonna be going downtown, they're gonna be doing all that sort of stuff. I don't think, it's a lot of money, and I don't think we'll get a lot of
It's
people.
like trying to compete with,
Because we did it once with
Gasparilla. It just, you just don't.
But our citizens go to our show. I mean, that's always been the, you know, and we get people from all over.
We've never done it on the same night as Newport Richie, never.
Yeah, but I think still more of our citizens would go to our show
We
than
did,
theirs, I would
we
think.
did the Christmas parade fireworks, right? Did we do the fireworks at the Christmas parade a couple years ago? When we had the Grinch movie in the park?
No, I know what you're talking about.
And I think we had, was it fireworks that day? But there was nobody there. I mean, there were three families sitting and watching the movie after the fireworks show. Because the Christmas street parade downtown with all the vendors and stuff, that's where everybody was. I was there, so I mean, yes, there were people there for the fireworks, but the movie, nobody, it was not.
Well, I guess the better question from my end is, would you guys prefer to move it to either Friday, Sunday, or Monday? Then if you're not gonna do it on Saturday or stagger it on Saturday.
I think you'd get more people if you did it on a different day. I don't see people running from Newport Richie to Port Richie for fireworks. I just don't see it.
The 4th is
I wouldn't
Monday,
do it.
Tuesday. I mean, you know, depending on when these folks are available, I mean, I don't have a problem with Sunday. I don't have a problem with Monday. you know. I mean, we're not doing an event like Kia Fest, okay?
Right.
It's an evening event. The fireworks go off, they last 20 minutes, people go home. Now, there is a waterfront district, people will show up early, they'll eat their dinners, they'll hang around, they'll have some drinks, they'll watch the fireworks and go home. Really, no matter what night you do it, that's pretty much the way it's gonna play out.
But the question is whether or not we're gonna get that same attendance on a Monday night on the 3rd, for example, versus if we did it
Well,
on
like I
Saturday.
said, people come early. I mean, yeah, if you know you're gonna come and you wanna watch fireworks, then, like, say from a business standpoint, if you're gonna go to like, one of the waterfront businesses that have a view of the fireworks, well, they're gonna come pretty darn early to make sure they get a seat, because not every seat now says view of the fireworks. It's the same with, people in the park. I mean, if they come home, they come after work, hang out in the park for a couple hours, see the fireworks go on. That's pretty much the way it works anyway.
I mean, doing it on Monday night, a lot of people are not going to work on Monday. I mean,
That's
on
what-
Tuesday, on 4th of July.
Because it's probably a national holiday, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably,
So
yeah,
I would think maybe
probably
a Monday night.
Well, no, but the court system, for example, picks a national holiday, but then they also give the day off before. So
Right.
the court system, I'm guessing, I haven't looked at the administrative calendar, but just for example, I think everyone's gonna be off probably Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday would be my guess. I haven't looked at it. So if you have that 4-day block, I would think Monday would be the other logical time to set them off, in my opinion, if we're not gonna stagger it on
Right,
Saturday.
I think Monday's a better option because 4th of July is Tuesday and, post office, I mean, a lot of places are,
Yeah,
Doctor's offices,
business
they're all
I used to
closed
work
on
for,
Tuesday.
yeah, that's what we would do. If
They're all
the
closed on
4th was
Tuesday.
on Tuesday, we would take the Monday off.
So if we think that a lot of people are gonna be off that entire 4-day block, because, most of the people that in the city are just normal working class folks. So, I want to put it on a time when people are going to be off and go take the family and enjoy it. I mean, that's the goal here. So if that's the rationale, then I think Monday would be the other logical
Yeah,
time
I
to do
would say
it.
by and large, people who get holidays off, people who work normal shifts, obviously there's hospitals, all kinds of people work different shifts. you may get Monday and Tuesday off, or you may just get Tuesday off, but you're gonna get Tuesday off. So if you get
Right.
Tuesday off, that means Monday, you can come down and enjoy the fireworks, not have to for work.
Right.
The other question that bakes into this is if we change the day, and this is directed probably towards Mr. Duke, does it change the amount of money that it costs us? Because we're paying police and fire to be there. Or do we pay them extra money or additional money to work on certain days? And would that Monday before be a day where we're paying time and a half or overtime versus the Saturday? In other words, would there be a difference?
City holidays, 4th of July, there is no way.
We would not, if we have the fireworks show on Monday, I don't think there'd be any significant change in our cost.
That's
It's an overtime, it's not a holiday overtime.
That's what my thought was from just knowing the union contracts and such, but I just wanted to verify that.
It'd be straight overtime for the personnel that we would need to come in.
And potentially, with some workers not being a weekend, it would be less, I don't know.
So is, by consensus, are we moving this then to Monday, which would be July 3rd?
That would be.
I would go for that, yes. Now, I mean, here again, I mean, is that something, John, we have to absolutely cut in stone for you tonight? In as much as we have two council members who aren't here.
What I would do is I'll go back to the vendors tomorrow
Okay.
and confirm that they're
You can, in fact,
available
do
on
it
the
that-
3rd.
Right.
But I will tell you, the longer this stretches out, the more opportunity there is for them to
Yeah.
book somewhere else.
Yeah,
So
my only concern, yeah, we're kind of short-handed on this, so it's sort of.
They should have been here then.
You know?
So you're not here, you don't get to, your input on what day we're doing the fireworks.
There you go.
Okay,
And
so-
if there was cookies, you wouldn't get them either.
So I'm okay with that Monday,
Yeah,
under the
okay.
circumstances.
All right, well, by consensus, are we good with Monday?
could I
Monday.
bring Saturday? I think he
Okay.
had some.
Yes.
Can I recommend that you also have a backup date, just in case, because when Sean was already contacting these vendors, availability was already thin. So I would recommend not only setting Monday's date, but also having a backup date, so in case Mr. Duke realizes that they're only available for one day, that we can move forward with them.
Well, the next logical place would be the Sunday, so I mean, if we can't do it Monday, well, I'd imagine we'd search for Sunday.
I
And
agree.
if there's a price difference, if you say, look, we can get 12
Well, there's
places.
gonna be a price difference, it's gonna be the following Saturday.
Well,
I'm just telling you.
so, but the bottom line is, I think Mondays are primary and then Sunday would be the fallback.
Agreed.
And then I think the other cog to this is how much do we want to put into this? And I first want to ask, how much should we budget for it? That's probably
20,000 was right there someplace.
was what we budgeted. So the question is that what we want to spend that 20,000 that's already budgeted, we're good to go? Or the question is, do we want to expand that a little bit? That was the question that was raised. I'm for following the budget. We hold our staff to it, we hold everybody else to it. As much as I'd like a bigger fireworks show, I think if we want to do that, we need a budget for it
Well,
for next year.
and let me jump in here, because John and I had a bit of chat about that, and it's like where I'm not really quite so on board with some of the numbers I'm looking at right here. But, basically, everybody's budgeting a 15-minute show, and they're jacking up the rate based on shell sizes. So I did some print-offs here, just for funsies. Let's see, 1, 2, I'm gonna give you one. I got it.
You have wonderful
You're lucky, you get the fireworks show on the charge.
This is a wholesaler, I used to be in business.
I figured that out.
This is a wholesaler, and they thoughtfully published up their 2023 wholesale price list. So I just want you to know what we're looking about when we're talking about shells. If you turn to the second page.
Well, the fire chief should probably get this too, if it's gonna be bigger shells, right?
I don't know how many copies I got.
Yeah, I'm gonna pass that down so you can.
Just so you know what we're talking about when we're talking about product here. And what I was talking to John about was that I would certainly like to see 4 and 5 inch shells incorporated into the show. Those are the ones big enough to cover the whole bayou. Those are the ones that people are gonna tell you that was the best fireworks show you've ever seen, okay?
Now, if you look at the second page, I got 5-inch highlighted. And I also have highlighted to 24/1. That means it's a case of 24 5-inch shells. It costs $349 wholesale. 6-inch, a case of 9 costs $269, okay? We are not talking a lot of money for them to tack on a couple of cases of 5 and 6-inch shells and take this from a mediocre show and turn it into a really good show. And that's a discussion for John to have with the fireworks, the folks who've given us these proposals. I mean, I don't see where we can't look at that $20,000 and without a very minimal investment, add in some 5 and 6-inch shells and really make it something special. And like I said to John, if they need the guns and the rats, I have them in my backyard. I'll lend them to them.
We hired Bill Colombo to do the fireworks show?
Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to do that. I think I can lend them guns and racks. I think that's the extent of my involvement. But, you know, again, and also, if you look down under multi-shot cakes,
What's a multi-shot cake, Bill?
okay, you know on your street, that box that they put in the street and they light it off?
And then shoots like 24.
It shoots a bunch of shots, okay? That's consumer cakes, okay? These are display 1.3 display cakes, okay?
Okay.
They're like that on steroids, okay? You can put some cakes, you know, essentially, you can actually put them in the park, right out along that water line out there and augment the show and with minimal.
They use them for grand finale sometimes, is what I've seen.
Yeah, a lot of times,
So-
what you do is you get a cake of salutes. It's a cake of 2-inch salutes, like bundled up, 50 of them, chained and wrapped in succession.
Like a
To go
blueberry
with
lemonade.
everything else.
Yeah. I mean, that's when we did a finale, we used to do 200 shots of 2-inch salutes, 100 3-inch shells chained underneath, with chains of fans of 5 3-inch shells, fans of 4 4-inch shells, and individual 5 and 6 over the top. That was the finale. That bayou was glowing from side to side. You put them big willows up at the end where they break and they just kind of rain that gold down for a long time.
I don't want you to burn my tiki hut down on the bayou. Okay.
Well, dude, you're open up a 20-foot one.
You already told me your backyard is a place to be, dude. I know where I'm going.
But I have a tiki hut with grass on top.
Maybe not
Or maybe not
July
after
4th,
this.
you won't.
It's
Mr. Polycat
should be fireproof. You need to check on that.
I just want to address something and just throw it out there, food for thought, that we couldn't jump into saying, yes, let's go with a 5 or 6-inch mortar, because there's parameters that are involved with that.
100 feet per inch.
Yeah, so I want to say like a 3-inch mortar is 300 feet parameter, and then when you get into a 4-inch, it could be 400. I don't know the exact number, but I know it grows to a certain point.
Again,
We have to confirm.
Well, what I want to tell you is it has been done. There is a spot in the bayou that is 600 feet from anywhere. Now, NFPA 1123, which is what you go by, is actually 78 feet per inch.
I just wanted to confirm before we
Standard,
guided him to.
what we always went with and PGA goes with is a more conservative 100 feet per inch. There is a spot in the middle of the bayou that is 600 feet from any land and any structure. Google back to the flag.
So you just have to get the date for,
I probably actually have the Loran coordinates somewhere.
welcome to Port Richey, Nancy. So we just need to have you get the date finalized, and then do we have to give them which show we want? Oh, we have to finalize who we want. right?
Well, what I'm understanding by consensus and reading between the lines some, is that we want to show on Monday the 3rd. We want a maximum of, we won't spend over 20,000. And to the extent possible, we want 4 and 5-inch shells.
I mean, I would say, if I could interrupt here, I mean, to me, I don't know if that 20,000 is a hard cap. Like, you know, if we could add 1,000 and get these really nice shells in, I'll go for the $21,000, you know. I just don't know where they're jumping it up to 25 or 30, where the hell they're coming up with those numbers.
So you're giving our city manager authority to exceed the budget?
Yeah.
Want that duly noted.
Right, okay, so
I ain't doing it if I want to do it.
If I were in one of your chairs, I'd say something like point of order. I want to make sure that that's the consensus, at least the
You can put it in
consensus.
the record if you want to, you know.
I mean, I love you,
Mr.
Bill.
Colombo
but
suggested
I
exceeding
want to
the
make sure all
budget. Yeah,
three
he
of you are okay with that. But Mike,
fine
seriously,
with that.
my first,
2 out of 3.
my first intent would be to go back to the vendor and say, look, I know what you're paying for this stuff. Give me a 15-minute show for 20 grand and I want X number of 4s and 5s at the end of it.
And a cake for the grand finale.
And,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
I know you can do it, you know, it's another $300 or whatever. This is very helpful in that negotiation
You're welcome.
process. Thank you. But I just want to make sure that, you know, before
And
Bill
by the way-
tells me to
By
spend
the way, that
21.
is one wholesaler. There are several wholesalers that we used to do business with in Florida. That's one of them. I know they ship down here. There's another one, Florida Firepower down in Miami. There's another one on the East Coast someplace. But, you know, every one of these shooting companies has access to all the wholesalers and all the products. So, you know, it's, you know, they want you to, yeah, trust me, people who see the actual cost of display fireworks are usually shocked that it's as cheap as it is.
So, and I
Compared to
agree.
what you get up on Highway 19 in the Big Ten.
So I agree that there should be a little discretion on his end. In other words, if he has a vendor that says for 22 grand, we can do this fantastic show, and then another one says we can do a mediocre one for 20, you know, I think that he should have the discretion. So I'm
Yes.
on the consensus board here.
Okay.
To give you a little bit of leeway with that.
I'm comfortable with that. I just want to make sure.
You're on
we're all-
the pyro train with me, brother.
I guess so. So, does that answer everything?
I'm good.
Okay.
I've got my marching orders for tomorrow morning.
The last thing I want to get into, that closes council business, that moves us on to old business. I'm going to pass that to Mr. Duke. There's a couple things that are on here.
I have an extra sheet. Do you want a copy? You have a copy? Right sheet?
I gave it to them.
Just as updates, Mr. Mayor, I mentioned the street project in my report. We're finalizing that. I would expect a purchase request coming your way. If not the next council meeting, then the first one in March. As you might suspect, Stantec continues to work on the water and sewer rate studies. They've received lots of information from staff, and they're doing what they do on that front. So that's still moving forward.
And so that's going to impact our enterprise fund.
They will make a recommendation on what they believe your rates should be
for that particular fund.
For water and sewer.
Right.
And then if you choose to, if they make a recommendation to increase and you choose to increase, then yes. So several contingencies there.
And where I was going with that, the only thing I want is when they finish, can we have a history of the last couple of years to see where we started and where we're at now, so we can maybe make a better decision on where to set those rates? Because I think without going back to look the last couple of years or the last few years, it'll be more difficult to make that decision. Yes.
Yeah, because I had a heck of a time figuring out some of them rate increases before they stopped. They were just, I couldn't figure them out.
Correct. But
I tried it one time. I tried to start at the original ordinance, and, you know, it had rate increases, what was it, 2.5% built in or something, to a certain point, and then it stopped, and I tried to do a spreadsheet, and I never could get it to work. I don't know where the numbers come from, so.
So I think that's it for motion.
Motion to adjourn. And we both second.
All right.
And